listeners. This is Jamie with Legends Health, Wellness, and Performance. And today we have a special guest. His name is Jaesen Kantar. He is the CEO of Humboldt Oils. And he is here to talk to us about how to grow. He's an expert grower in the cannabis industry. Welcome, Jaesen.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Yes. How did you get introduced into the industry, or where did your passion start from?
I got introduced to the industry kind of on a whim, really. I was actually working on a documentary, and I ran out of money. And a friend of mine lived up in Humboldt and said, "Hey, come on up, and you can make some money trimming." And I was like, she's like, "Cash." I was like, "Okay, cool." So I rallied up there, started working on their farm trimming, and about 2 weeks later, their head guy got injured, and they asked if I would step in and take over, and I did. So all of a sudden, I realized I was actually pretty good at this, and it was actually kind of fun. So yeah, a couple weeks went by, and then they asked if I wanted to run their clone operation, and so did that. And then that was pretty much like the spawn of it all. Like, I realized how much fun it was, and how I just started loving it. So I just started becoming a sponge and started sucking up all this information from all these master growers, people that have been in the industry underground for 20 plus years growing. So I was really fortunate to kind of land in this pod, or this group of people that were like amazingly diverse, hippie growers.
So what makes the difference between like a quality organic grow versus just a basement grow versus indoor versus outdoor grows? What's an organic grow first? Let's start there.
Well, it all starts with the soil, the medium in which the plant is growing in. That is the base. And so if you have rich, organic, living soil, you don't need pesticides. You don't need any of these other, synthetic fertilizers, or even animal-based fertilizers. So it all starts with the soil, and depending on how rich and how alive and how well you take care of your soil is going to really dictate what your end product is going to be. And that's going to separate an organic outdoor grow versus an indoor grow versus a hydroponic grow versus just someone's backyard kind of thing, a pot.
Okay, so I have heard just with regular gardening, like the darker the soil, the more healthier the soil is that, but I would think that would be dependent upon where you lived in the country.
Yeah. I mean, it's dependent on the soil itself, your geography, and what you put in the soil and how long you've been nurturing the soil. So it's not necessarily dark. However, like when you have rich organic compost and you pull that out, that's going to be, almost black. Worm castings are like almost black. So, but that's just part of the soil. You've got leaves and humus and all these other natural organic things that you collect from the forest to, mix in with your soil. And this is real living soil.
So what should people be putting in their soils?
Very little. No, I take that back. Just organic, plant-based material. You don't need, for true organic farming, you don't need animal fertilizers. You don't. But the level between, say, most organic farmers that go all the way to like a complete vegetarian, soil, as organic versus someone that just uses, say, back guano, chicken, Stutzman's like chicken manure, and just a couple of like compost tea and worm castings. Those farmers and that kind of farming is still considered organic, and there really isn't anything harmful in that farming. There are still no pesticides and that kind of thing, and you can still get a really good yield. But at some point along the way, depending on on how well you take care of that soil, you're going to have to add some stuff later on in the growth cycle, and at some point you might have to spray your plants with some citric acid or some other kind of organic pest type thing. One thing though, if you're really in tune with your soil, when you see disease on a plant or some deficiency on a plant, that took place 2 weeks ago in the soil. So when you see it on the plant, if you're just watching the plant and you see something happen on the plant and you go, oh, I've got bugs. Well, that deficiency happened in the soil that allowed the plant to be weak enough for the bug to come in. And so then you treat the plant and you spray the plant, instead of treating the soil. You see what I'm saying? So
isn't that a part of that when you're saying trimming though? Isn't some of that a part of the trimming process is, oh, I have a deficiency here. Do you typically cut that out, or sometimes do you try to baby that back to health?
Well, no. So the actual trimming process is way further down in the process. The trimming is after the plant is dried and you actually are trimming the excess leaves and excess stuff off to make the flower perfect to go to the dispensary. So that's the trimming. That's the final stage of it.
Yeah, but I was at a dispensary, so I'm going to hold off here because we will get to trimming what you're talking about. But I was at a grow, and sometimes they were just cutting out. If it turned yellow or that section when they were taking. I know you take trims and clones, but I know that like when I saw a couple of the plants, like a couple of the leaves or the leaves had kind of turned yellow, and so they just cut those out. I don't know if that's cutting or trimming.
That's leaf. So in that process, it's leafing. So there are going to be, your big water leaves throughout the growth cycle, just like any other tree. Leaves die and new leaves come. That kind of thing. So leafing happens throughout the growth cycle, and so when the leaf turns yellow, you pull the leaf off. Now, if someone's cutting out actual part of the plant because it turned yellow, well, that's a definite deficiency in the soil, that allowed that plant or that part of the plant to get sick.
Okay, so that leads me to my next question. Growing from seed versus growing from a clone. Can you tell us the difference between there, and is there a difference in the outcome of the product?
Okay, so there's two different ways to think of these two things. Let me start with the clone first. Okay, so if I have a strain, and this is on the medical side of things. Okay, if I have a strain that I know I need it to be consistent because I'm making medicine with that strain. Say it's a 18-to-1 CBD to THC ratio, and I know the yield, I know everything, and I need that to be consistent. I will always use a clone so that I have consistency throughout. Okay, so I have my mother plants, I'll make the cuttings off of them, and then I usually will cycle my mothers every 6 months, instead of keeping them for a year or whatever, but I'll make cuttings and I'll take the strongest rooted cuttings first, and I'll take a couple of those and turn those into new moms. And so they'll gradually, as they grow up, and then when they get to a point where I'm going to transplant them into the full mother size pot, a 30-gallon pot, then I'll take one of the mothers, the weakest of the mothers, and I will put her in pasture, and then that way I'm continually taking the strongest, healthiest rooted clones and cycling them through as mothers. Now, seed, go ahead.
Okay, on that, is that any clipping of the plant, or is that a specific part can you take any part of that you're the mother per se, or the clipping? Does that have to be a certain part of the plant to get the clone?
Not necessarily. However, you're going to want to take the healthiest shoots that are coming up. Again, you're trying to always ensure optimum health. You want the healthiest plant so that it has the best chance of rooting in the shortest amount of time, and it's going to be the healthiest.
Great. Now let's go to seeds.
All right. And now on seeds, and the reason why you can't, if you are growing a specific strain for medical use, You can't grow it from seed because say I have I seeded one branch of my mother plant with a specific strain. Okay. And I took all the seeds from it and they're all from just one branch. They should all be exactly the same, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So if I plant 5 of them, all 5 of them are going to be different.
Mm.
It's like if you
Well,
and your husband,
do we know why that is? Do we know why that the seeds are so different?
well,
They
it's
just
just like
are.
when 2 people have kids,
Yeah,
right? And they said they have 5 kids. How come all 5 kids don't look identical?
you're right. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Good
Yeah. So
analogy.
that yeah. So that's how that works. So it you might uh, get a bigger plant, or you might have this strain, or you could get a plant that even has a lower percentage of THC and a higher percentage of CBD. You just don't know. And if you need to grow an X amount to meet, the demand for your medicine, you can't risk, having this diversity within one strain. Now,
Hmm.
seeds are very important because that's how we're able to make new strains. So you can cross pollinate this and and so you can make different strains that way. But as far as trying to grow for medicine, you're going to want to stick with what you know and what your outcome for your specific medicine is.
So I'm assuming at Humboldt, most of those are just taken from clones, and you're keeping them alive, and keep going. Or are you ever starting from seeds now? That because let's talk about Humboldt for a second. How big is your grow?
We have 45 acres as a farm, and right now we've got 10,000 square feet on this year's grow. Next year, we're going to we're going to bump that up to a full acre worth of cultivation. We're adding 3 greenhouses. So what that's going to allow us to do is have 3 full cycles within each greenhouse, so we can maximize the amount of medicine we're making. We will always have our outdoor medicine, and so it's going to fall into different tiers, of medicine. And
Okay,
that's Go
let's
ahead.
talk about what's the difference between the outdoor versus the indoor. How does that affect the medicine?
Well, when you're doing true outdoor, Mother Nature is in control. So yes, it's farming, and she could come and ravish and just destroy everything, or you can have like the perfect yield. Whereas in an indoor grow, you're in control and you're playing Mother Nature, and you're using artificial lights and all that, and you're trying to create what an outside would look like, but with optimum conditions all the way from start to finish. So the advantage to an indoor grow is that just that you can maximize. You should know exactly what your yield is going to be by the end.
Mm.
You've planted the room. You can get 4 pounds of light. You know exactly what you're going to get. Now the difference in quality, there's a difference in quality, and a lot of people argue this, but Mother Nature is the best chemist. Sunlight, air, temperature, and that's one of the reasons why Humboldt is one of the 3 best places on the planet to cultivate weed, and it's because of the warm days and cold nights, especially in the flowering season. So Mother Nature, you man has tried forever and ever to one up Mother Nature, and it'll never happen.
Mm.
It'll never happen. So that's why it's good to have both. Like in a greenhouse, you're still using Mother Nature. You've got a bit more control over the elements, especially in the flowering stage. You don't have to worry so much as far as mold and that kind of thing with unpredicted rains and that kind of.
So somewhere along the lines, I heard, and I don't know if this is a rumor, but it depends on how close. There's certain things on how close you can actually space the plants together, and then you don't want different cultivars or strains next to each other. Can you expand on that?
Yeah. So it depends on your style of growing. So there's different theories as far as growing. Like in an indoor grow, there's something called a sea of green. and you're going to plant plants really close together, and they're not going to be big and bushy, but they're going to go straight up, and they're going to be, a couple of big colas on it, and it'll just look like this huge sea of massive green. Okay, and then that's one way of growing. You could also spread them out, give them a little bit of space, and you're going to have a slightly bushier plant, and you're going to have a couple more colas on it. So it really depends on how much space you have, what you really, what you've got to work with, and what your end goal is. Are you just growing for maximum yield? Are you growing for, flavor? So there's different things that you could be working towards, and that will pretty much dictate, what style you're going to grow.
What was about the plant? What was like the first, what surprised you about when you first got into the industry and looking at the plant and watching the plant grow? Like, what did the plant teach you?
Taught me that actually less is more. Like most people have a tendency to overfeed, overwater, just really, try to, oh, if I give it this, and if I give it this, and if I give it this, it's going to be the bigger. And it's not true. It's like, if you start putting all this stuff in the soil because you want this bigger plant, you're not really thinking properly, because you don't feed the plant, you feed the soil. So when you feed the soil, the plant grows in it. It's when you have the, healthy, substance for something to nurture, it's just like, let's go back to humans, like if a mom, why she's pregnant, is drinking or eating shitty, like, lots of excess milk, or, all these different things, the kid's not going to get what he really needs to be the healthiest when he comes out. And it's that same kind of thing. So if you take care of the soil is going to take care of the plant. So now when you're feeding the plant, you can feed your plant, and then you're actually feeding the plant. But if you're going to start pouring things into the soil drenching, and expecting that you're feeding the plant, well, the uptake of what the plant can actually, the nutrients it can actually uptake are going to be based on the soil. So you're counterbalancing there.
In functional medicine, that's exactly what I talk about, trying to find the root cause of disease. A lot of times when you're finding the root cause of disease, in medicine today, we when we go to medical school, we learn about this is the diagnosis, right? And then we put you into a classification. This is a cardiologist, right? This is a cardiac disease. This is a neurology disease.
Oncologist.
And we so specialize, where, in my opinion, the root causes, and in my training, the root causes of disease end up being, sleep, nutrition, how you're managing stress. And if those foundations are correct, just like the soil that you're talking about, you're overall, you're healthy.
Right.
The body is healthy. And unfortunately today, an average physician gets 16 hours of nutrition training. An average chiropractor gets 300 hours of nutrition training. And so we're going to these medical professionals, and they're really smart. Don't get me wrong, they're really, really smart. And this is what got me really, really upset in my training, because I am conventionally medicine trained, but it got me angry a little bit, just because I didn't learn about the endocannabinoid system. I didn't learn about, and I didn't learn the value of nutrition as the base. And I didn't learn, really these stress management techniques. I didn't learn that in school. It wasn't until after school that I learned that. And that's what you're saying about this magical plant that we have.
Yeah.
It's the same idea, which I think people need to connect that. I think that's really important, that people actually connect that. Now you're big into the medicine part and helping patients. Tell us how involved, how did that come about?
That first came about, I was diagnosed with severe PTSD from the VA. And the VA is like, okay, as a normal Western medicine thing. They're like, here's a cocktail of all these different drugs that is going to help you with your symptoms. Here's some Ambien so you can sleep. Here's some
Mm.
lorazepam when you get stressed. Here's some bupropion so you can manage your mood. Oh, and you might need um, some albuterol if you get overexcited and you start to wheeze, you know? So they just put me on all these different, oh, Prozac. The Prozac was the main one that I was drowning in, you know? So initially when they put me on all these, and then I went through 2 years of therapy, it helped, you know, it helped because I had to relive and go through bring up a lot of different really tough things. However, they don't ever say how hard it is to get off of these things and how it's going to completely change your life, the way you see everything. You know, and I got to a point where I was like, just flatlined, you know, like there's no ups and downs, there's no highs, there's no lows. You know, something would happen, I'd be like, yeah, okay. You know, something shitty would happen, I'd be like, it's not so bad. You know, and that's not how life is. And so Prozac was the main one that I really wanted off of. So I'm like, okay, I'm done taking it. And after about 7 to 10 days, you know, I was like, oh, cool, I can totally stop this. And sometime right after that, then it would always kick in. And I tried this for almost 2 years doing this. And I would kick in and I'd just be like completely suicidal. I mean, it would just go off the deep end where like, I know what the outcome is. I know we all die. I know all of that stuff is that way, you know, but you know, it's all psychological. I mean, those drugs rewire your brain chemistry. You know, they completely rewire it and you don't realize that. And you think you can get off because you think that, oh, it's just this, but no, like you're
And were you
totally,
getting medical advice too at this time too to try to
yeah,
help wean you off?
yeah. They're like, oh, okay, just take a half one every other day. Okay, take it like that. Here, take this drug to help you get off of that drug. You
Mm.
know, and it doesn't work. So I started making concentrates. So I started, you know, like everyone else, I got on the internet. I'm like, okay, how do I use cannabis? Because I'm growing it. So how do I use it to medicinally to get off of these drugs? You know, and I started making first off with a RSO, a Rick Simpson oil,
Mm.
you know, and I started doing with that. And then I started making different formulations. Maybe if I take this strain and I combine this strain, that might help. And so it took about 2 years of different formulations and the introduction of CBD dominant cannabis strains for me to start really making some headway. So after about 2 years, I was able to completely get off of Prozac and be done with it and be happy, you know. And so that was like the ding 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 ding, like this shit works.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and
I
then go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say it's so important. I call it emotional abundance. We
Hmm,
that we have these extremes, right? And we have these emotional life, and when we feel numb, and I think a lot of people with PTSD. I'm sorry to hear that happened to you, but I'm also grateful because now you're a big voice, and
right.
in the space. So that part I'm grateful for, and just because, and I'm so grateful that you now have, because I think life, so much of life, an elevated life, is having the emotional, the highs and the lows, and that and I think some people, you know, when they have the lows, to me, it's like, great, I'm having a low, and now that I'm going to have a breakthrough because there's not
Right.
another minute, there's not another day that I'm going to actually live like this anymore. And it
Yeah.
sounds like cannabis was, you know, a tool in your toolbox
Yeah.
to help you to help elevate, to get your life elevated, to help you thrive and achieve and have better performance in your life.
All the way around. All the way around. I mean, and that was just the start. You know, as I was working through that, then my pops called me one day and he had prostate cancer. And I was like, well, if this can work for this, then why can't I make something to help him treat his cancer? And I made formulations, try different things. Finally, I got something that we brought his PSA down from a 60 all the way down to a 4. You know, we were able
Wow.
to, you know, so I was like, okay. And then another friend calls and goes, oh, I have endometriosis and the pain is so bad. So she came up for a week and we worked with different formulations and trying different things. And we were able to find something that worked for her pain management so she could get off of the oxy and the other drugs that the doctors had put her on, and then another friend called, and then another, and so that's how everything just kind of snowballed, and how I started working with different formulations, and then reaching out and trying different strains with different cannabinoid ratios. This one's got this much CBD, this much THC, this much CGN, this CBN, and then also the terpenes, and looking at those, and this is over the course of 5 years, obviously, like all these different aspects within the plant. Like everyone else, we're just learning, and we're learning how this particular terpene affects, the mood. And if you take that and you add a little bit more CGN, and you add, and so what works for me best in the way that I make my medicine is working with the entire plant, and I'll take the plant and I'll look at the entire profile of everything, and then I'll blend that with another profile, and I'll take, a little of this and some of this, and bring it together. But it's dealing with the whole plant. And what we see a lot in the industry now is people breaking apart the plant completely, and isolating every single cannabinoid and isolating every single terpene, and then rearranging and putting it all back together to make a formulation that they want. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that's not what Mother Nature made. And so there is a difference in medicine, at least what I found.
I just had a podcast with a pharmacist. His name was Ethan Carruthers, extremely smart man. And he said in science, the reason we're doing that, he said in science, we're really good at studying one or two chemicals and getting, one or two different side effects. And this is what the side effects are. And that's what most of the pharmaceutical drugs that we have on the market are. He said, now it gets really, really iffy if we're like studying 3 or 4 different chemicals. And he's like, things get pretty hazy because we don't know how to kind of put that together. And he's like, and then you look at the cannabis plant, and the cannabis plant has 300 to 400 different chemicals that, and mostly largely unknown, have 1,000 different benefits that, are mostly not understood at this point.
Right.
He's like, man doesn't know how to study it. That's not how science has been structured. He's like, but you go back thousands and thousands of years. He's like, we know that this plant works, and we know we don't have a double-blind, placebo-controlled trial. He's like, but we can look at history, and history tells us that the plant, that the plant itself has so many different benefits. And he's like, that should be scientific in a way enough for a lot. Now, Israel, this is the other interesting thing that he said. He said in Israel, he's like, they are really at the forefront of this, and they have machinery now, artificial intelligence, and they're really trying to kind of decipher that. But we have been so have had government overreach so much, stifled is a good word, that we haven't been, that science hasn't done that. So that you've done this on your own, and that you've been able to figure out this on your own, is absolutely incredible. So I want to hear more about that, because I know you have 12 different strains that that are kind of your babies. So let's hear about those.
Yeah. So, those are the ones that I work with the most. And so I dedicate on the farm every year 3 rows to new strains. People will give me, and they could be a variation or a strain that I already have, but they're like, oh, I got this from here, or it produces like this. And so I'll always test things, for a full season to see, actually how they grow and what they do. But I do have almost another dozen strains that they're legacy strains, strains that I don't want to die, because you can't find them anymore. They're, this is it. And so I hold on to those, because who knows what is going to happen a little bit further down the line, how to be able to cross things, or where they might come in handy. So I've got those set outside, and then I work with, my main strains, and I work with strains from 20 to 1 all the way down to a 2 to 1. And they vary in different terpene profiles and different cannabinoid profiles. And those are the ones that so far have been my go-tos for the medicine that I'm currently working with, you know.
Can you define terpenes? I think there's a lot of listeners, some listeners. I have a lot of medical professionals that listen to this podcast, and then I also have a lot of lay people. And I think sometimes when we say terpenes, people don't know what that is. So can you give us your definition of it?
Yeah. So terpenes are what gives the cannabis its flavor, its nose, you know. So you can look at the terpene profile. It's if you were just to Google terpene profile of cannabis, and it's going to give you a wheel, and on that wheel you're going to have lanolin, and it smells, you know, piney, and you've got myrcene, and it smells like this, and then each one of those terpenes are going to have a benefit, you know, something that they actually help with. You know, some help with sleep, some help with calmness, some can help with, and so what you're seeing a lot in the marketplace now, and the way that companies are marketing things, you'll see a brand and they'll have calm, sleep, relax, enjoy, you know, stimulate, you know. And so basically all they're doing is highlighting one terpene profile that kind of induces that kind of a feeling, you know.
Well, we buy
And
emotions. I mean, really, that's when we're purchasing anything. Branding is all about what emotions. So I can see why a lot of different companies are doing that. But do you think they're only using one, or do you only think they're using one strain, or do you think they are combining a couple different strains?
well, I mean, we were just at MJ BizCon, you know, in Vegas a couple weeks ago, and I went into one of the booths. I think it was Terpene USA. It was a terpene company, you know, and what they're doing is they're taking terpenes out of all the different things that you can find terpene: lavender, lemon, pine, and so they're extracting the terpenes and then organizing them in a way to replicate a cannabis plant, the smell of a certain strain of cannabis. There's no cannabis in that
Oh,
whatsoever.
that's interesting. That's
You know, but they're marketing and selling these terpenes as, oh, okay, here's, you know, here's Bubba's gift, you know, here's your sour D, you know, and they're just making terpenes. So it's a terpene company, and they're representing themselves as a cannabis company, and you're seeing more and more and more of that in the marketplace, you know. And you're seeing a lot of that, especially with hemp derived products, you know, because when you pull CBD out of hemp, you know, you're isolating one cannabinoid, and then they're selling that as a product. You know, CBD isn't a product. CBD is a cannabinoid, just one of this entire spectrum of cannabinoids. And there's a lot more of them in a cannabis plant than there are in a hemp plant, but yet they're only pulling out the CBD out of hemp. Now, what about the rest of the plant? Yeah, I know it only has less than 0.03% THC, and people are going, oh, it's a whole plant extract. Well, no, not really, because you're only selling the CBD. You're selling one cannabinoid of it.
Yeah, no, and I think there's so much confusion around that, because I just read an interesting article. It was a scientific article. It was done with mice, and it was looking at specifically a CBD isolate and a full spectrum CBD. But then it was like, how do you define full spectrum? You know, because
okay, but is it CBD coming? So that's CBD isolate and a full spectrum. Are those both coming from the hemp plant? Or is the full spectrum coming out of a cannabis plant?
Exactly. So this is what I think that, you know, consumers, you know, get really, really confused about, because they'll see CBD isolate or they'll see full spectrum. And the truth is, if you use a CO2 extraction, if that's your extraction method, the majority of the time, even if they're saying it's full spectrum, really the way that it comes out is a isolate when you're looking at the lab testing. But then you know, people are marketing it as full spectrum.
Right. Okay. So, but you can still have with CO2 extraction or any extraction method, you can still have a full spectrum. And it's what you do after that comes to that form and how far you continue to process it to get it all the way down to an isolate form. You can pull the CBD isolate out of a cannabis plant, if you wanted to, but that's like someone coming and saying, example, I had a buyer come up and want to see my farm, and I show him my beautiful farm, and he goes, "Can I get X amount of CBD isolate?" And I looked at him and I said, "Okay, so imagine this is my orchard, my orange farm, and these are prize-winning oranges, and you want to come here and buy vitamin C from me. I'm not in the vitamin C business. Like the orange, you want the orange. That's where all the nutrients is. You want to eat the whole orange. You don't want to just vitamin C." And so that's the same thing when you get to a cannabis plant. You know, you don't want one cannabinoid out of it. You want all the cannabinoids. You want all the terpenes. You want all of it, because that's where the true value is. That's where the medicine is. You know, and
Oh,
when you
I
go,
so agree with you.
yeah,
I so agree with you, but I can see, just because of the different states, different legislation, I can see why he was specifically asking for that, because just the way that the government is. But yeah, and I think the laws will definitely change,
right,
as you know, the laws will change for that. But again, I just don't think people, you know, we're all becoming more and more educated with this.
right,
There's not a, in my opinion, there's not an expert in the field, because the plant is so
right.
understudied.
Very, very, very true. You know, and both plants are understudied, and they are not the same plant. And I know people in the hemp world would love to say that hemp is just like cannabis, but they are different plants. They have different range of cannabinoids. You know, a cannabis plant has 100 more cannabinoids. They have a completely different terpene profile. You know, you have all these different strains that have different terpene profiles, and industrial hemp is industrial hemp. That, you know, it's an industrial product. And yes, you can pull out an isolate out of hemp and sell it. And I think that for everyone that wants to make a CBD water or a CBD coffee or a CBD, they need the isolate. And the only way you're going to be able to get that much isolate to be able to make a product that's going to go on a national stage, it has to come from hemp, because you can't grow cannabis industrially organically. It's just
And it's
not
really
feasible.
really helped this movement too. I think we need to,
Definitely.
I think we definitely need to, you know, give kudos, rah to hemp, because I think it's really helped escalate this, and brought attention to,
Right.
you know, the cannabis family, I should say.
Right. Well, CBD in general has been the one cannabinoid that's been able to break the stigma of THC being locked in prison. You know, it's allowed it to come out and say, "Oh no, there's more medicinal value out of the cannabis plant. You know, hemp plant, you know, there's more medicinal value out of the plant, this illegal plant, than just getting high." And CBD was the gateway, you know, opening the gateway to that.
Yeah. Let's go back to the grow. What's the grow cycle like? How long is the grow cycle?
So for outdoor up in Humboldt, we put everything in the ground usually mid-May to the beginning of June. You know, we'll start propagating back in February. They'll go in by June 1st, and then usually by mid-October, it becomes weather dependent. You know, and so we'll let them grow as long as they can. We just don't want them to hang out in the rain. You know, so we'll usually harvest right before the rain. You know, October's harvest moon is always kind of like the magic time to be able to try to pull things in by. Now, if you're dealing with greenhouse and light depth, I mean, I've got neighbors that are doing 4 cycles a year, but traditionally you would do 3 cycles, you know, and so you would start, you'd plant in March, you know, and then that would be done by June. You'd have your next one in by June. That would be done by beginning of September. You'd have your one in September, and then that would come just after your outdoor harvest. So you kind of go down that line. So, and that's I guess the typical. Most people will do three runs a year, but again, I've got neighbors that are doing 4. You know, and so usually the 4th one basically is an indoor grow. You know, in a greenhouse, usually with all artificial light, unless we have a couple weeks of Indian summer.
Okay. So that's how the time frame to grow. So then what happens next? So let's go back to the trimming or the drying of the plant. What's the next step?
So the next step when harvest is, well, there's two different ways. We are going to move into a fresh frozen process. And so I'll just quickly tell you how that process works. Is basically you cut the plant down, you flash freeze it right there. You take that plant, you transport it to your manufacturing facility, and then they go ahead and extract, all the cannabinoids and terpenes and everything out of basically a live plant. Okay, so that's kind of a newer way of doing things. But traditionally, you would harvest, you cut down the plant, you hang it to dry. Once it's dry.
And how long would it dry? How long would you need to dry it for?
It just depends on the outdoor temperature, the amount of relative humidity, in the air. Again, if you have humidity that's under 30%, the plant's going to dry a lot faster. So it just depends on your drying setup, but it's usually anywhere from 10 to 14 days, is what we like to dry things. And again, if it's super dry, you don't want things to over dry, so in that drying process is where you start to decarboxylize the plant, meaning that if you have all the THCA, CBDA, all those A's, the sense of the acid part of it, those start to come off. And that's how you go from THCA to THC. So then you start dealing with both of these cannabinoids. And actually both cannabinoids have immense value. The A hasn't been studied much yet, but if you, in the drying process, you don't dry till you have just this minimal amount, you actually dry it so that you've got, a bit more of a balanced, it's going to have a little less A than the actual CBDA and then CBD. But that A has its own value, and that's something that hasn't really been studied yet. So if we're dealing with THC, once the plant's dry, then it goes to the trimmers. You basically buck up the plant, and then a trimmer goes and trims all the leaves off and makes this pretty little flower that gets sold to a dispensary, and that's what you get to put in your pipe.
Okay.
With the CBD plant, there is no trimming process. Basically, we strip the leaf, the flower, everything off the stick, and then we extract everything out of that, flower leaf combination. So that's where we're getting our whole leaf.
So a lot of times with CBD though, it comes from the flower, and then a lot of is like seed and stalks. Can you kind of tell me the difference, or do you know the difference on the profiles from seed and stalk versus the flower? Because we know THC, most people use the flower, but I hear a lot with CBD that they'll use the seed and stalk.
In cannabis, there's no seed because they're all female plants. So there's no seeds, and no, we don't use the stalk. You strip everything off the stick. Obviously, they're going to have some tiny little pieces of stick, but everything comes off. You're going to get the abundance of your cannabinoids and terpenes out of the flower and leaf. Like that's where the fruit is. You're going to get all the juice comes from the fruit. You don't get very much juice from the stem.
Yeah, no. The reason I'm asking is because I was looking at a buyer, and that's how they were wanting. At the time they were coming from India, and they were saying that they wanted to sell me the seed and stalk, and that the CBD was coming from seed and stalk, and I went, huh? Like, so
again, there's a market for everything. There's a market for every part of the plant, and then with the hemp plant, hemp's been making paper and clothes and rope and everything else for centuries. Industrial hemp has rooted its place in world history. That's why it's such an amazing plant. Cannabis on the medicinal side has equally, if not more, value, on the medicinal side. but you don't take cannabis stalks and make rope. I mean, it just hasn't. It you can't scale like that. In industrial hemp, you live in Utah. Like you can go out to farms and see 40 acres of flat field of industrial hemp. I don't know if you've gone and seen any farm that's 40 acres of flat cannabis.
Mm-mm. No,
Not in Colorado, not in Washington, I mean, I've never seen it.
No, not unless it's I've seen big, large facilities, and I'm actually going out to Denver this next week, and walking through a couple different grow facilities. So
yeah, I've seen huge facilities,
yes,
indoor grows, greenhouses, multiple greenhouses, but it's not cultivated like an industrial hemp crop. They're different plants.
So do you think there should be some type of, or can there even be a standard with growing? Because just the way the world we live in, everybody wants rules and regulations, it seems like. Is there a way that we could standardize this? Is that a good idea? Is that a bad idea? I don't know.
Okay, well, let's compare, because you got to remember, this is agriculture. Okay, everyone gets still confused. Oh, it's Canada, it's agriculture. Okay, so I think that on the agriculture side, the closest model that we could compare to or should emulate would be wine. So is there a standard growing practice for grapes?
No, everybody has their niche.
Exactly, and that niche is based on geography.
Mm-hmm.
Your Appalachians, one place might have more sun, one place might have more rain, one place might have, so you can't have a standard, a one size fits all for agriculture. It's not in any single crop that is grown worldwide is there a standard on how to grow it. So
okay, so I don't know the plant well enough yet. So could you have, let's just say somebody had mold on their plant. Mm-hmm. Could somebody just trim that mold off and we not know it as a consumer?
Oh yeah, that happens the whole time.
Okay, so, and is that a good thing? I mean, how do I say that? Should we be concerned about that?
Yes. I mean, we should always be concerned because let's go back to our beginning of our conversation. So the plant wasn't able to fight off the disease, mold. Mm. Why? Because the soil wasn't healthy. So the plant had a deficiency and toxicity that allowed a disease to grow on it. Just like our bodies.
Yeah, so the only way, how do we know this when we're consuming? So now I'm saying, hey, I want to be a consumer. I'm ready to purchase the plant. I go down to a dispensary. How do I know what product to buy?
You should always be able to look at they should either have a barcode or something that tracks that plant all the way back to the farm. Okay. So I tell this to everyone that's wanting to get into this industry. They want to make a product. I want to make a tincture. And I want to make it out of flowers. And so I found someone that's selling me flowers so I can make my tincture. Like, okay, so you're buying the flowers. Have you been to the farm where you're getting your flowers from? And 99% of the time, no. I'm like, so you're just getting flowers that a middle person came and said, oh yeah, it's coming from this region. And they're like, yeah. I'm like, so what I suggest you do is find out exactly what farm those flowers are coming from and ask to go to the farm. Go to the farm. If the farmer is like, yeah, come on over. Like, look at my soil. Stick your hands in the soil. Smell it. Like, take a look around. See what's going on. If someone wants to come to my farm and buy product from me, like, please come to the farm. I want to show you how, I take pride in what I'm growing. It's quality. Like, I want to show it off. So if someone's saying, oh, no, you can't come, you can't do this, something's wrong. It's the same way when you go to the doctor and he's like, here, take this. And you ask him, why, what is this going to do? And he can't tell you. He's like, oh no, just take it. I'm the doctor. You're the patient. Something's wrong.
Hmm.
Something's wrong. So you should do your due diligence and buy the best product you can. When you go to the grocery store, we take for granted that this says organic and this one isn't. And we take for granted that the store did its due diligence and bought organic, and it's actually organic produce. Ideally we'd love to see that, oh, this came from this region to this place. That's what we would love to see. We don't always see that though. But cannabis, you just really should do your at least some due diligence.
That's right. Can be a real challenge, because a lot of people walk into a dispensary and they're just relying on the bud tender, and there's so much knowledge to understanding the plant and to even being able to consume of what to buy. And a lot of times people are sick, they don't feel well, they just want help right now. Right.
So again, here we go back to the organic produce. You can go to the supermarket and buy organic and hope that the store did its due diligence, or you can go to the farmer's market and go and buy produce that just came, that the farm picked it yesterday and they're selling it to you.
Yeah.
Then and you can taste the difference, the difference in quality, and that's doing your due diligence. It's much harder, yes, for a patient who's looking for medicine to be able to source, go all the way to the source to get product. Definitely. However, there are products in a dispensary that come from a single farm, and that product, you can either scan a QRC code or a barcode and be able to find out where that farm is, and then get online and see batch numbers, and it should give you a profile of the farm, and at least that should give you a bit more peace of mind that you're getting it from this place versus who knows where it really came from.
The industry's seen a lot of changes. What other changes would you like to see? How would you like it to the industry to change even more?
I would like to see the industry really start to model or mimic the wine industry. Because certain appellations are going to produce certain product, and we should start looking at buying cannabis based on appellations, and saying, oh, cool, I want to buy something from here because I know the qualities. I want to buy a Bordeaux from Bordeaux versus, a Bordeaux from Napa. There's going to be a difference, but you should be able to choose, and it should be sold that way. Coffee is another one. Coffee is a crop. If you want to buy a 100% pure Kona coffee, that is only going to come from Kona. And you know what it's going to taste like, what it's going to, represent, the quality and all of that. So I would like to see the cannabis industry as a whole start to mimic the wine industry. The regulations and the standards that cannabis is held to way up here is so much stricter than what wine is. Wine, in the process of making wine, you get rodents, you get, hair. Those are things that happen when you're making an industrial batch of product. You are going to have some contaminants in it. It's almost impossible not to. But the standard that they're holding cannabis at way up here, as far as, mold and pesticides and all this. Again, if the plant was grown healthy, you wouldn't have all of those things. But most people don't understand growing in that format. So they just grow and they'll spray and they'll produce a product. And no one should spray Eagle 20 on something that someone else can consume. No, there also shouldn't be fluoride in your water or your toothpaste, but we can only do so much.
Yeah, I do want to. There's a couple points that I want to go back onto the grow, because
Sure.
you just there was a couple things. One is there's several different things or articles that I've read that the cannabis plant as a whole can help remove some of the toxins from soils. So the soils we have, that have destroyed in some way, if we would grow cannabis type plants on the soil that the cannabis plant would actually soak that up, and then we could we could throw that hemp away that we grew, and then the soil would be in a better shape. Is that accurate statement?
It's kind of accurate, but you crossed them at the end.
So okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So hemp does pull toxins out of the soil. Like after Chernobyl in Russia, they planted hemp everywhere to try to clean the soil. So hemp pulls toxins out of the soil. I mean, cannabis does not like hemp does. So you wouldn't plant cannabis to try to clean soil like you would hemp trying to clean soil. But yes, that is one way to try to clean toxic soil, is planting hemp. It's one plant you can plant that will help clean the soil. Yes.
Now, what about female male? Because you had said earlier that the majority of these are all female plants. So can we do a kind of a dive of how that chemistry works between the female and the male plant?
Sure. I mean, in a nutshell, female plants produce flowers. Male plants produce seeds. So in cannabis, everyone smokes the flower or uses the flower for whatever their method of ingestion is. They don't use the seeds or that. So everything in cannabis is female plant oriented. The only time you see a male plant is if you're trying to breed plants, so you'll have your male set way over here and you'll have all your females over here, and you hope that you don't pollinate your females, and that's how you would ruin your crop. Monsanto has been notorious for destroying organic basins, valleys that were organic by cross-pollinating with pesticide plants that are, going to pollinate this whole field. So yeah, there is a huge difference in the two. Now, I'm not 100% sure on the hemp side of things because I don't grow hemp and I don't know, a whole lot as far as all the different parts of what they're using for CBD production. I know that for the most part it's biomass, and that's basically the plant just chewed up, and then they'll use that in the extraction process. I don't know, the whole seed value within a hemp plant because I just don't work with hemp at all. So
it's not your space. It's not your space.
Not my space.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else I'm missing that we should know about growing that I haven't came up with a question for?
If you have any other questions, just let's do another one. We'll just get online and we'll just talk about it more. Because we could go into any little part of what I overlaid, and we could be specific on any little part. But again, every situation is different. Every region is different. If you know what your market is, that's going to dictate how you're going to grow. If your market is, medicine, you're going to try to grow the most organic way you can, I would hope. And so some people are in the city and they don't have access to farmland. So they have to grow in a warehouse, and then in a warehouse, you can grow hydroponically, you can grow air, you can grow soil. So, you have different mediums within that. So again, it's all dictated by, your geography.
Environment, and that goes with even epigenetics, disease that you get. We know that 10% of the disease that we actually have is based on the genes that you actually have from your mother and your father, and 90% is the environment.
Right.
And plants are, very, very much the same way.
Right.
Let's move a little bit into just there's a variety. So do you guys typically sell, or do you go through the extraction process as well? Or do you send that off? What happens after it's
both?
planted?
So So both. So we sell raw flour, product after it's dried, and we also take the large portion of our yield every year goes into the extraction process, and we extract to oil, and then that oil is what we use to make our formulations for our different medicines.
And what type of extraction method do you use?
I prefer an ethanol extraction method. I mean, I've sent stuff off, had it done butane, I've had done CO2, and tested all three of them side by side with patients. I usually will test everything on myself first, but test it with patients, and it always comes back that ethanol is the one that retains the most potency across the board with cannabinoids and terpenes, and it's made the best medicine so far. So I stick with what works best.
And in the previous podcast, we that also came up, and it was ethanol that was right now in the market space. Was Freon was number one, and then ethanol was number two in regards to extraction methods of what retains the terpene profiles and the cannabinoid profiles.
Interesting. Yeah, because CO2 has been, everyone's been touting CO2 for the last 5+ years. I mean, they made it illegal in California to do food grade butane, which is crazy to me, because that's got a better, it's safer, and it's got a better value of end product than CO2. Everyone's like, oh, but CO2, you don't need a solvent. It's solventless. It's this. No, CO2 is high pressure. It comes out as a product, and then you have to clean that product with a solvent. So there is still solvent, so why not just use an ethanol extraction, and use an organic ethanol, like either grapeseed oil or grapeseed alcohol or any of these other alcohols. There's a great company, Oregon Organic Alcohol Company, and they make a great product. They make. So
is that who you send it off to?
No, that's where I buy my alcohol, my ethanol from. Yeah. So, I mean, but they do the product that they make, all organic, everything is fabulous.
Okay. So are you involved in the extraction?
I oversee the extraction. Yeah. And I do have a small rotary evaporator that I use to make oils. And then I use those in my lab to make up new formulations. So I am in the extraction process on a small scale. And that's basically just so I have, product always to work with, and test, new formulations, that kind of thing. But the bulk of the commercial side of it, that all gets sent off to a space that has, can do a large amount.
Well, fantastic. I think we might have to do another podcast. I think our time is kind of coming to a close, and I appreciate you sharing your knowledge, and
no worries.
I appreciate that you're growing a medicinal, medicine out there for people, and thank you for all of your research that you've done. And I'm going to leave you with the last words of how people can get a hold of you. And we'll go from there.
Well, first you need to come up to the farm next year. Let's do a podcast at the farm.
Okay.
Sit there and overlook, the beautiful field and do a podcast from there. So let's do that next year. People can find me at HumboldtOil.com. Also on Instagram, Humboldt Oil, on LinkedIn, Humboldt Oil, or you can just find me as JasenKantar.com, and there's links on my website that will take you to everywhere as well.
Okay, and I'll make sure that those are included on there's taglines so you guys actually can see those written out.
Awesome.
And so thanks for watching the Legends Health, Wellness, and Performance Podcast with Jaesen Kantar.
Thanks for having me. I'll see you soon.